everyone. I'm going to be talking today about truth in literature. I'm going to be taking it as my premise that good literature has to be true in some way. This lets a reader connect with the characters, be immersed in the world, feel the tension, and if themes to resonate. All of this has to feel real or true somehow. But in what sense can books be true? The major definition of truth through at least Western history has been whether or not something corresponds to reality, whether or not something really happens. Obviously you're making this up in your head, so it's not gonna have happened. It's nonfiction, and even then you're condensing people and twisting things for your story. So does a novel just have to be realistic to be true? And I don't think so. For one, you have Albert Camus in his Rebel, and he argues that anytime you have a book, just by having a book, it cannot be realistic. It has a beginning, it has an end, it has transitions, it has themes, all of which the writer is just making up. So this isn't just a difference in that reality is over here and reality is bigger than the world of the book. No, it's a difference in kinds. The book is something that is manufactured. Everything is created for a purpose, whereas Camus was taking it for granted that the world is just as it is with no inherent underlying meaning. So you can't be realistic in a novel because a novel is just a different type of creation or objects than as reality. Then you have C.S. Lewis, and he's going to argue that a fantastic genre, speculative fiction, even though it gets a lot of guff for being unrealistic, is actually going to be less escapist and more realistic than something like James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist of a Young Man. Because how many novelists, how many writers are gonna putz around and finally finish their great novel and the crowd goes wild? Not many. How many people are gonna fall in love and marry up like Jane Austen any book ever? So this possibility, this realism on the surface that makes a successful career or with a loving marriage, these are good things. They could happen, but the fact that they could happen makes them more deceptive than if you're running around with Frodo and the Ring of Power, because everyone knows that's a story. That's not gonna happen. And then you have another type of realism that's not the traditional realism. It's psychological realism, which, if you've read psychological realism, hopefully your mind is not like theirs, because they think thoughts like Napoleon invaded Russia. That means I can murder this woman with an axe. No, you can't. Please don't do this. So psychological realism just takes the focus of the story away from the action and what really happens and transfers it to the mind. So it's not necessarily more realistic than any other novel. It's just the focus is different. It brings the mind to the foreground. So whatever we're looking for, whatever truth we find in a book, it's not going to be in realism. It's got to be in something else. So I'm going to just kind of go through a quick history of philosophy here. For the ancient Greeks and the Romans, truth is the idea that ideas and things align. And for Socrates and Augustine and other people, this truth is innate. So you're born with it, and you just have to process it in your mind. You kind of recollect it. And this is going to be called rationalism. So then this is kind of the default philosophy after the fall of Rome and for centuries until Descartes comes along. And Descartes believes this too. But he does this thought experiment, and he says, let's pretend that we're being deceived by a demon and we can't trust our senses, we can't be sure of anything. What can we know? What can we, recreate? And so he remakes the entire world based off the fact that he himself is thinking. And that's where the whole, I think, therefore I am, I exist, and so that is my starting point, that I am. And so before this, philosophy has kind of been predicated on a sense of wonder. And now it's going to be turned away, and it's going to be coming from a place of doubt. So the idea of truth gets splintered. you have the rationalists, the people who still believe, as people have pretty much always believed, that truth is inherent and you can trust your minds and all that. Then you have some people who take Descartes' thought experiments and say, okay, from now on, we're not gonna trust in the mind. We're not gonna believe that you can know the truth prior to any sort of sense experiments. Instead, you have to see it, you have to feel it, you have to do something that's repeatable and measurable, and this basically creates the modern day scientific method. This is going to be called empiricism. It's pretty much the default for most 21st century Americans. But just like there are some people who take Cartesian doubt and become empiricists, there's some people who take the idea that, the mind is the guarantor of truth, and they take that to mean there cannot be anything that exists independent of the mind. So they're going to be called idealists. And for an idealist, that my computer is sitting here on this desk, I can feel it, I can see it, but these are just sensations. They're not things. They exist only in my mind, and I'm the one creating it. Without me here to experience it, it doesn't exist. So, early on, empiricism and idealism are kind of strange bedfellows. You have this, empiricism based idealism that believes you can experience these things, but you can't assume anything behind them. This stand might be here, it might not. All I know is that there is something here that is acting as a stand might. But then there are the more typical empiricists that say, no, I see this, I can feel it, I can repeat it, I can measure it, I can repeat the procedure of having this desk here. Therefore, I can make that assumption because it is consistent. It's really a difference between cause and effect. The idealists are much more skeptical of it than the empiricists. But the idealists lead to this theory of coherence. Something is true not if it's, coheres to an external reality, because we don't know that external reality, we're just making it up. So something is only true for these coherence if it is consistent. You make it up in your mind. Is it always this way? Does it make sense with itself? And so this makes sense in a story, because everything that exists in your story is there because you put it there. You make it up. It is all in your mind. And I think this is the defaults that people will critique. Oh, this doesn't make sense. The author is changing the rules. I buy that dragon, but I don't buy that this guy is surviving that hit to his armor. And that makes sense. And people will say, hey, how can you believe in that dragon? It's just fake. But no, it has to make sense in the story. Does it follow the rules that have been established? So this coherent thing is true, but I don't think it is the entire thing we speak about when we speak about truth in literature, because it's a closed circuit, and I think we've all experienced when a character feels so real you meet them on the street, when you read something and you just cringe because why would you do that? That's so stupid. Or you feel the cold, or you feel the heat, whatever. There's something there that transcends the world that has been created in this one mind. So at this point, you have idealism and coherence and this mind-based internal link, and then you have empiricism and you have rationalism. And one guy that sort of ties all this together historically is Kant. So he says that reason creates categories a priori before any experience, and it takes that sense experience and subsumes it under those categories. So you need your reason, because reason creates understanding, but you also need that sense experience, that this isn't something that is just innately there. You require a true experience with the world. So that's how he rectifies that empiricism-rationalism divide. But then he also goes further to try and address the idealism, more materialistic divide, and he does so by saying that you can have real things. There are real things in this world. This desk here is real, and this is the noumena. But the things I'm experiencing from this table, that's not the table itself. It's just how this table is presenting itself to me, and that's called phenomena. And from that, you're gonna get Edmund Husserl, who invents phenomenology as a philosophy. And phenomenology kind of holds in tension and values both these things in themselves, the noumena, as well as our personal experience with it, the phenomena in the world around us. So phenomenology is made more famous by Heidegger, who is Husserl's pupil, as well as just the world's least role model. Just don't go home and say, "Hey, I want to do what Heidegger did." No, please don't. You'll be arrested, and rightfully so. So, but one good thing Heidegger does is he emphasizes the role of authenticity within phenomenology, and for Heidegger, authenticity isn't just "this is what I feel today, guys." No. Authenticity is the self doing its own work to determine what is true. So you bracket out all of your biases, your past experience. And what does that bracket mean? It means you do what Descartes did, and you just forget about everything you know. But you don't do it for the entire world. You don't have the memory of a goldfish. You just temporarily take this one specific object and come at it as if you've never seen it before. And then you take the phenomena that you're receiving, the sense data that you're getting, and you try and you interpret it the best you can, regardless of external pressures, regardless of what anyone else expects or desires you to take away from this object. And so authenticity is this whole body, this mind, this sensory, this bias defying, this antagonist defying pursuit of the truth. And this is truth as it really happened. This is getting back to the correspondence theory. It's why phenomenologists kind of see themselves standing with Aristotle and with Descartes, because you're getting back away from the idealist side, away from the idea that truth is just in the mind, and trying to get back to the things themselves. So where does all of this leave us as writers? In what way is good literature true? I think, just as we said, the first answer is, writing something that is internally coherent. It's this, so, the rules aren't broken. If you have a character who has always acted this way, you're not going to have them suddenly swing over and do a 180, unless there's, been a significant event or some reason for them to change their minds. You're not going to change the rules of magic. You're not going to change the rules of, some object that, you've created that maybe exists in reality. Say you have a gun, you have a horse. The reader is expecting the gun, the horse, to act the same way as they would in reality, unless you establish early on that they're different somehow. And you can do that, but you just have to make that first gap, that first, breach with reality, so that you're telling a coherent story. Also, you want to pay attention to words. You're not going to have, a character put their foot on an ottoman unless you're writing a novel about Osman and his empire, in which case, knock yourself out. This doesn't mean, however, that you can't start the story, in the middle, in medias res, or that you have to tie up all the loose ends. It just means what you tell has to be finished in and of itself, right? It works as its own entity. And then moving on to the empiricism and rationalist discussion, I think the biggest takeaway from empiricism is just notice the world around you. Go out and look and see what is. And you want to make art that is based on reality, not art based on other art. How many times have you read a discussion of I don't know, a tree or something, and it's gnarled or knobby, and we use the same words to describe something over and over and over again. Just look out and look at a real tree. See what that looks like, Then with the rationalism, that's the idea of innate truth, and that's really hard to get at, but I think one of the reasons we have such a hard time describing what is true in literature is because there is a sense in which something is innate. And how do you get at that? How do you get at that first truth when we've all gone and lived our lives and had these other experiences that might have, covered up the truth, or just distracted us from it? And in phenomenology, there's something called the eidetic reduction. The eidetic reduction starts when Descartes looks at a piece of wax. He notes, the temperature, the color, the density, the texture, and then he lights the candle. And all of these properties change, but it's the same wax. So the eidetic reduction is the idea of taking something and putting it through all these different variations to see what is essential. And we can do that with literature. If you read across time, you read across cultures, you read across, philosophies, politics, religion, you can get a sense of what is essential to humanity. And there's some underlying human truth here between, the millennia that we people have been telling each other stories. And it's not like every single thing is true, it's not like everything is equally true, but I think if something has lasted for 5,000 years, it's because we tell each other that something for a reason. There is an underlying fact there that it is difficult to describe, but just we know it intrinsically. Which, it's definitely subjective, but that comes down to our last thing, and that's the story has to be authentic in the true meaning of authentic, which, is basically that whole-bodied, whole human mind, sense, antagonist defying, bias defying pursuit of the truth. And you do this both from the author's perspective. You, as the author, aren't writing what you think someone wants you to say. You're not writing what your editor wants you to say. You're writing, your best approximation of what is true. And that's not like every single character is going to agree with you. That's not like, some people are always perfect and some people are always evil or whatever. That's crazy. But the narrative arc displays something that you can defend, something that is reasonably true. And you don't have to go out and say something this didactically and say, this is always true. At least personally, when I write, I'm writing kind of more to explore what is true, but that exploration is something that I am truly seeking. I'm not doing it to win anything, because if I had, that would not be going very well for me. But then this authenticity is also at the character level, and characters are gonna lie, they're gonna manipulate, do bad things, blah blah blah. That's fine, but their actions are going to reflect their beliefs. Characters might think they believe one thing, but then their actions say something differently. They might say they believe something, they might hope to believe something, but what do they really value? What do they really do? It's their actions that are going to show who they are, and that's fun to have intention. And then just lastly, just don't worry about being realistic. And that sounds sort of like a contradiction to the empiricism thing, pay attention to the world. But it's not, because you're not recreating the world, you're kind of just laying out these touchstones, these tangents, so that it might happen. You're not recreating the universe, because what's the point? We're not reading a book to relive our 9 to 5. We're reading a book, to have some enjoyment, to learn something, to forget about the world. I don't know, but not in an escapist sort of way, but just in an exploration. So I don't want anyone to get discouraged. There's been a lot said, and this is a difficult topic. There's a lot of ideas, and you don't have to recreate everything. Just thinking back to the eidetic reduction and how people say the same things over and over again. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes that's just a hint of an underlying philosophical truth, and it doesn't have to be new to the world. It could just be new to you, and you finding something, you discovering something that has been uncovered. That is another way of reviving truth. And in phenomenology, Heidegger talks about truth basically as a discovery, or a rediscovering something that has been known but forgotten about, and just reviving that, bringing back something that's been lost. That too is a discovery. So just don't worry about writing what you know, just, write in order to know. So there's so much more I could say about this. I could talk about this for an hour and probably talk myself around in circles, and who knows where it would end up. But this is a good stopping point for now. I'm going to come back to this later. But thanks for coming along. If you enjoyed it, hit like and subscribe.